My uncle Fred graduated from the Harvard School of Architecture with great distinction. And in the 20s, he had a very successful architectural practice in Omaha where he did churches and little buildings and houses and so forth, and he made $8,000 or $10,000 a year, which was an enormous amount of money to make from credibly performing the architectural profession in the 1920s. When the 30s came, the architectural permits, building permits in Omaha, would sometimes go down to $30,000 per month for the whole city of Omaha, and some of those were furnace repairs. There was exactly zero work for architects, including my distinguished architect, Uncle Fred. He moved to California, and in California, he took drafting work at low rates for a few architects that still had some work. And when it got worse than that, he went to the county of Los Angeles. In the agony of the county, they classified him as a laundryman to save money, but had him do drafting work, which after all was exercising his skill. He didn't think it was beneath him. He coped as best he could. He never complained to anybody. And his pay after deductions, all through 31, 32, 33, 34, 108.08 per month. Now that wasn't as bad as it seems, because he rented a whole house in Glendale for $25 a month. When they created the FHA in 1936, he could take a civil service exam, at which he was first. So for the rest of his life, he was the chief architect for the FHA in Los Angeles, a responsible and interesting and civilization benefiting line of work, and he had a long and happy career doing that. He never got discouraged. He never thought what he had to do was something he should wail about. I never heard him complain about anything. Woe is me. Generally speaking, there are two things I found in my long life one you should never do. One is never feel sorry for yourself. If your child is dying of cancer, don't feel sorry for yourself. Never, ever feel sorry for yourself. And the other thing you never want to have is envy. That's the only one of the deadly sins you're never going to have any fun at all. Pick one of the others. And so, but if you go through life just everlastingly plugging away at these bad times, Kipling has gone totally out of vogue because it's not politically correct to write lines like a woman is only a woman, but a good cigar is a smoke. And of course, so nobody is familiar with Kipling, but Kipling's If is still great poetry. If you can keep your mind all about you or losing theirs, just think of what good advice that would have been on Wall Street and a lot of other places recently. And treat the little fluctuations in fate. He said, treat those two imposters, success and failure, just the same. And in the end, he says, well, if whatever else happens, you'll be a man, my son. Good message. Good message. I mean, why not take these opportunities, the hardships and so forth, to make a man of yourself? Or a person of yourself, to use the modern lingo. And so I know how you should cope with whatever the difficulties are of the present day. Just keep your head down and do your best. And do. Some of the people who had the best careers in my age cohort and the age cohort just before mine were the ones who had the worst clobbering in the 30s. Because they were there when the great boom came. If you just kept plugging, why the favorable tide came in due course. Well, so much for current passing troubles economically. I do think that the job market is likely to be fairly lousy for a long time, and I do think that the worst of our troubles in certain markets are not over.
Which markets do you think?
Well, I think the universities that thought they were making successful investments in timber because they were all buying the same groves are still in from some disappointment. And I think that the worst in a lot of real estate ventures is still ahead of us. And so I think there's plenty of pain out there still to come. That doesn't mean we won't pass through. It just means that there's plenty of unpleasantness still ahead.
Do you think that the job market is as difficult or is going to be as difficult now as it was back in the 30s? How do we put this on some
No,
sort
it's
of
nowhere
comparison?
near as bad as it was
How do
in
we
the
put this on
30s.
some sort of
This is hog heaven compared to the 30s. This is, no, that was unbelievable. I lived in the 30s. We didn't have this social safety net. You know what people did in the 30s?
what?
They moved into one another's houses. That's what families were for. It was a Confucian system. My grandfather cut his house in half and moved one of my uncles in. And my other grandfather saved his son-in-law's bank using a third of the only good assets he had on earth. And it was just pain and trouble. And without a family system, it was difficult. But the people who plugged well and just kept going eventually did fine. And so, but I think there's still plenty of trouble ahead.
Why
I don't
do
think
you
it matters if you're going to live a long life.
Yeah. But why
It
do
may
you,
be an advantage to have some trouble.
why do you think that the job market's going to remain lousy for some time to come? Is it just that there's not demand that's built up? Is it that companies have downsized, they can see they can get by with less?
Well, Tom Friedman said it's like the car that has to run across 300 miles of hot desert and it doesn't have a spare tire. We've kind of used all the standard tricks that it's safe to use, and now we still got the damn desert to go across and we don't have the spare tire. So of course it's working. But why fret too much about what you can't fix? Just keep your head down and do your best.
You know, a lot of the students that are in this room could be here from the business school, and there's a real sense around the country at this point that Wall Street is a bad place. There was a column today in the New York Times that Andrew Ross Sorkin wrote where he sat down with Oliver Stone, who's got his new movie coming out, Wall Street 2, and he said, you know, I don't think Wall Street's an evil place, maybe Goldman Sachs, but he does think that there are some serious bad guys who populate Wall Street. What do you think about that?
Well, if you're in a miasma of competition, and to use the word that is so popular, greed, and you attract very competitive people, and they're thrown into this miasma, of course there's going to be more regrettable behavior than you might find in a monastery, or at least than we thought we might find in monasteries before we understood them better. And so of course Wall Street is going to have more regrettable behavior. And you know, Lord Acton had this law that you all taught that power corrupts and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. Well, the Munger version of that is that easy money corrupts and really easy money tends to corrupt absolutely. And I don't think it was good for Wall Street that they had this absolute torrent of really easy money when idiots and knaves were making a fortune selling shoddy mortgages with ridiculous theories. And it was very regrettable behavior. And it was the easy money that allowed it. And of course, the adults who could have fixed it, like the accountants, who had ridiculous standards, without which a lot of the bad behavior wouldn't have worked. The accountants utterly failed us. And by the way, there's practically no sign of any intelligent reversal of that failure of that profession. I have yet to meet many accountants who are the least bit ashamed for their contribution to our recent troubles, but it was immense. Imagine when Enron comes down to the SEC and says, we want to write a little contract with A and a little contract with B and take all the profit we're going to make from these complicated contracts over the next 20 years into earnings immediately and put an asset on our balance sheet of $28 million from signing 2 pieces of paper. And the SEC, led by wonderful accountants that had studied in great places, why, of course you should have that kind of accounting. What the hell were they thinking? How could anybody have any respectable understanding of human nature without realizing that the kind of people who are going to be tempted by that accounting were not going to be able to resist the temptations. It was disgusting. And they're not ashamed yet.
So I take
How many people have you heard lately talk about how ashamed our accountants ought to be at our recent troubles? Nobody's blaming them. They assume it's like addition. It isn't like addition. The system of accounting for the bad debts of banks is carefully set up so at the top of every boom, the bad debt rate goes to zero. Who but a nutcase would have that kind of an accounting system? I mean, I'm not making this as a joke. This is not a parody. These are the accepted accounting principles of your nation.
Why do you think that has not been the focus? And do you think FinReg and Basel III are a joke?
Well, partly the establishment accountants want to please the people who are writing the checks. And partly the academic accountants get full of people who've overdosed on mathematics, and they want everything to be in balance. And they don't think that that really isn't rational in creating rules for a human behavioral system. They're too mathematical and not rational enough in dealing with their fellow humans. You can't give the average Wall Street CEO really lenient standards of accounting and expect the figures to be good. The accountant is like the referee in soccer. The accountant has to be the adult that prevents the mayhem. The accountants don't want to be the adults because it causes liability, it causes responsibility, it's difficulty. They have to be good at things they're not sure they know. There are a lot of reasons why they shrink from it. But it's their duty under God, and they failed us terribly.
That makes it
We
sound like
lost the referee.
That makes it sound like those CEOs are inherently bad people, that they won't follow the rules themselves unless there's someone there with a stick to beat them back in line.
Well, I do think the CEO culture is likely to promote people who are very competitive and very driven and very aggressive at accomplishing what they want to do. And that means if the guy down the street is doing something that enables him to report more, they want to be like the guy down the street. They can't help themselves. They're that competitive. I don't believe in being that competitive. I believe it's part of human merit to know, like Kipling, you don't lose your head when everybody else is losing theirs. If somebody else makes a lot of money or reports a lot of money, let them. You know, it's this envy thing. It's pernicious, and it has caused a huge problem and a huge danger for our republic to have all these people competing to report phony earnings. Do you think they were really earning this money from this mortgage trading? Look at the write-offs. Are you really earning money when you put something on your balance sheet that really isn't there? That when you reach for it will fade away like mist? What the hell kind of a system is that? It's an utterly irresponsible system. You can't blame the miscreants as much as you can the adults whose duty it was to prevent the miscreancy. Somebody said you can't blame the tiger for behaving like a tiger. You got to have a gamekeeper.
Does that mean we should also look at Washington and the regulators?
Well, if you think the accountants behave poorly, Washington set a new record. I have a rule for politics, which has served me well in making predictions, and that I quit claim to you. The politicians are never so bad you don't live to want them back.
So all of the drama that we've watched unfold over the last 2 years, all of Washington's attempts to try and figure out what happened and to prevent it from happening again, you think it's all been for naught?
No. What we have is way better than nothing. In particular, if you take the rules, which most people in my political party object to, for making the commercial banks behave a little better in dealing with fiscaholics who can't really handle things like checking accounts. I think that the changes that have been made are all to the good. And my only objection to Elizabeth Warren, who is not in my political party, is that she isn't tough enough.
Why do you think that that is something you feel, but your party doesn't? Why do you think your party doesn't agree with you on this?
Well, I think all politicians tend to behave badly under the peculiar pressures of their trade. So I think they've chosen a profession where it's hard to behave well. If it's hard to behave well and you're in a miasma of wrong incentives, so you get a lot of bad behavior. I think we're lucky the system has worked as well as it has. In my state, we have a thoroughly gerrymandered legislature. So if you have to be an extreme nut on the right or an extreme nut on the left, or you're not allowed in the legislature. And there are 10 sane people that creep in every decade. At the end of the decade, the right and the left agree and throw them out. And this is the biggest state and the biggest country. This is a very, very regrettable set of circumstances. How well are you going to behave in that kind of a system? You get so you hate the other people in your chamber. You need this ever-growing tide of money. You can't really tell the truth as it is because you'll offend various people that are important to you. It's a miracle it ever worked as well as it did. I suppose it's better than absolute despotism, but sometimes it's a little close.
Did you see the news today that Cuba said it will be laying off about 500,000 people from the government jobs there and pushing them back into the private sector? Is this an admission that maybe despotism doesn't work either?
Oh, well, no, we're way better than Cuba. I mean, talk about dysfunction. In East Germany, where the best 5 million people left, because they were allowed to and because the conditions are so bad, and the remainder were put under communist police state for 60 years. I always say about that will even ruin Germans, which it did. And if the system's bad enough, it will ruin the people in it. And two things work beautifully to ruin an aggregation of people. All the best people leave. That's a sure source of huge failure. Then you have the remainder under a total crazy bunch of people, like, say, the nutcase that runs North Korea. And, of course, that'll ruin anybody. I mean, have you seen those pictures of North Korea at night? It's dark. They have starvation. In the year of our Lord, 2010. They have people starving in the dark. That's what communism will do for you if you work at it hard enough under a despot.
Why don't we talk a little bit about some solutions? There is a huge push right now to try and figure out how to fix the economy and, more importantly, how to fix the job market. The president has unveiled his plans over the last week in terms of some tax cuts that he's put out, some incentives. Do you think those are the right plans?
Well, again, I'm sort of against my own party. I think my taxes are a little too low. And I don't think we needed the last round of tax cuts, nor do I think that hedge fund operators deserve to pay lower taxes than taxi drivers as a percentage of income. I think when you're that crazy, it's serious. And so, no, I'm not wild about the taxes. In terms of the jobs, of course, you remember I lived through the 30s, and I was a very observant boy and young man. And I found it very interesting to see how that economy, which had 25% unemployment for a long, long, long time, and real underemployment. I mean, the architect doing drafting work, classified as a laundryman, he was a fortunate one. And I watched that thing be pulled out by this accidental Keynesianism of World War II. And it was a very interesting thing to watch. But there we had a spare tire. We had centuries of reputable financial behavior. on which to draw. We could print money, we could do whatever we damn pleased to solve the problem. Now we've used those weapons so aggressively that it's dangerous to keep using them in ever increasing amounts. And of course, that's what makes me afraid. If you ask what I would do if I were the benevolent despot of the United States, I would have the biggest infrastructure program you ever saw to go to power from renewable sources. And by that I don't mean corn. That was one of the most asinine ideas in the history of the world, is to use corn for motor fuel. I mean, you can argue that the people that come up with that kind of stuff don't deserve hardly to be at the table at all. But the idea of rapidly going to the sun, basically, and creating a vast infrastructure that will do it is a thoroughly sound idea. And we now know how to do everything that we need to know how to do. And I think the country would get behind it if people had the sense to concentrate on something large and important and sensible. I think you could have gotten the country behind such a vast program. And I think not only we need the stimulus, I think we're going to need the whole infrastructure to use all this renewable power. So I think we had a chance to turn our lemon into lemonade, and we still have it. And so, but if I were running the world, boy, would we be playing that card hard. And the people who weep about oil and gas, one of the interesting things about oil and gas is that the entire growth rate of China, which has been utterly remarkable in recent decades, has been achieved when their percentage of GDP spent on oil and gas is 3 or 4 or 5 times ours. So the idea there's something terribly to fear because we have to spend a higher percentage of GDP on oil and gas is so much twaddle. And the guy who says it is twaddle is not in the economics department. It's Dyson, the physicist, who's as old as I am. But Dyson is right. It does not make a big difference in the economy of the United States.
It would in the short term, no? If you look at it as a tax on the consumer at this point, when they're already in a difficult situation?
I think it would be a net plus if we were plainly doing the right thing, if we borrowed the money and created the infrastructure. I think when we just borrow the money and shovel at people, it's dangerous. But I think it is less dangerous when there's something really meritorious you're doing with the money. I think the infrastructure is sure to be very useful. It's sure to be needed. It's going in the right direction. Of course, global warming, I think, is not the main problem. In other words, to me, the main problem is using up the hydrocarbons too fast. In order to feed the current population of the Earth, we need lots of hydrocarbons for insecticides, lots of hydrocarbons for weed control, and lots of hydrocarbons for fertilizer, primarily nitrogen fixation. And we don't have good substitutes for those. Even the plants that already know how to fix nitrogen, like alfalfa, we're goosing the hell out of with petroleum-based fertilizers. And so I think it's irresponsibly unconservative not to slow down on the use of the hydrocarbons. And the right way to do that is to just gear up massively. And I think it's a very legitimate kind of stimulus. I don't see a way we all can't agree on it. And I mean, who's against using the sun with a lot of clean energy and so forth?
Well, there still are questions, aren't there, about being able to store the sun's power in a battery while it's nighttime?
Well, of course there are problems of time-shifting power if you're going to create it from the sun or the wind. But they are solvable problems. If you take the most expensive, difficult way, which is pumping water uphill and taking it back, even that is not technically infeasible given a willingness to commit enough of GDP to it. And we may get batteries which are amazingly effective. In fact, I think we will. I think the big lithium battery, we do not go to the big lithium battery because lithium is such a light element, number 3 in the periodic scale. The reason we go to lithium is it will take an ungodly number of charges and discharges, which is what we have to have from these battery systems. And lithium is better than that, better at that than any other thing we know of. So I think all this stuff is, in a sense, the long-term picture is the best it's ever been. Because the main technical problem of mankind, whether it's 9 billion or 12 billion or whatever it's going to be, is energy. With energy, there's no shortage of water. As we sit here, sometimes Israel goes 6 months using half of their water comes from the Mediterranean. With enough energy, there's never any shortage of water. And we are looking at a technical solution to the main problem of mankind, which is this energy problem. And the cost of it, considering our need, is not that great. And so, well, I'm getting way away from, but you can see at least what I would do. And I don't know why everybody doesn't agree with me.
Are you okay with the president's plan, though, to take some of this money for infrastructure? He's got a 6-year plan, he says, $50 billion in the first year, which is this year, to build bridges, tunnels, light-speed rail, other things like that. Is that a decent idea, too, even though it's not your idea?
Generally, I'm in favor of needed infrastructure.
Okay.
But the one that really turns me on is changing the power source for mankind in a really massive way. And you see, take Burlington Northern. In order to carry all this freight at this much lower cost per ton mile, they double-decked all the trains. Means every tunnel had to be ridges, had to change that. We've done all that. That was a hugely desirable thing for the civilization to do. And if there's more of that can be done, I think you're going to find that the stuff that's really needed over the long pole is pretty massive and is located in the energy sector. And I personally want to keep the hydrocarbons. I don't want to use up all the hydrocarbons. The rest of you may be so smart you think you're sure that man can grow all the crops we need and solve all the problems without the petrochemicals. I'm not so sure. I think that might be quite difficult. At any rate, why take the risk? It's not that big a deal to do what we ought to do. If we hadn't got so diverted by going into these miasmas where there were enough crazy people on both sides so you couldn't get a rational solution no matter what, if we deferred some of that stuff and saved our energy for the big one, we might have got the big one done.
One area where you've put your money where your mouth is on this front is with BYD, which is looking into battery-powered cars at this point, too. How close are we to actually finding solutions that can be rolled out not only across our country, but other nations as well?
Well, I think that solar power is obviously going to get considerably cheaper. It's obviously technologically feasible. It doesn't matter that much, as Freeman Dyson has pointed out, if it costs an extra 5 points of GDP or something. That's 2 years gross if you get the system working right. Growth, I mean, it's nothing. And so, no, I think all this stuff is coming. I just wish it had come faster and with more rationality. And I think we've been distracted a lot by people who bleated about the wrong things. And I'm not sure somebody as technologically ignorant as Al Gore is entitled to speak on this subject.
You think there's any hope?
I think you should have punched your ticket in a few better places before you open your mouth.
Do you think that there's any hope, though, that we get past the idea where everybody is pushing their own agenda or their own idea, and even when you get to energy, you've got people who think it's wind, or people who think it's solar, or people who think it's natural gas, or people who think it should be nuclear power?
Well, I think we'll end up with more of practically everything you can think of. But in the end, you have to go solar. There's not an endless supply of uranium, nor is it totally desirable to every little crazy hamlet have its own nuclear capability. There's a lot to be said for going directly to the sun, and thank God it's as copious and as reliable as it is as a source. I mean, think of how lucky we were. People in Easter Island didn't have any sun to solve their problems. They basically perished when they used up their resources. This is one where our profligacy leaves us with a wonderful option that's never going to run out for us. This is a huge benefit, and the young people in the room ought to be rejoicing that the main technical problem of their civilization is basically solved. I don't mean it isn't a lot of work to work out the details, but we know how to create high voltage transmission lines with transmission losses of less than 10%. We know how to do all this stuff. And the time shifting of power we know how to do expensively, and I think we're about to figure out how to do it more cheaply. But if we had to do it expensively, it's doable. There's nothing that's impossible. And that is a blessing to all you people with a long run ahead of you.
Charlie, what's it been? Is it 69 years since you started here on this campus?
Well, I left here 70 years ago.
So you left here 70 years ago.
And came at 69 years ago, yes.